When Ryan invited me to spend the summer at his family's lakehouse, I said yes without thinking twice. We'd been friends since college, the kind of friends who could go months without talking and still pick up exactly where we left off. I needed a break from the city. Too much noise, too many screens, too many nights that felt the same. A week by the lake sounded like a reset. Ryan promised long days on the water, bonfires at night, and absolutely no responsibilities. I packed light, left my phone on silent, and drove out of town feeling free for the first time in months. The moment we arrived, I understood why Ryan loved this place. The house sat a few feet from the water, surrounded by tall pine trees that whispered when the wind moved through them. The air smelled clean, wood smoke, lake water, a hint of rain. You could hear birds instead of traffic, and the nearest neighbor was a mile away. I took a deep breath and thought, yeah, this is exactly what I needed. Ryan's dad, Mark, was already outside when we pulled in. I'd met him once at graduation years ago, but time had changed him. He still had that easy smile, but his eyes looked different, like they'd seen too much and learned to hide it. He greeted me with a firm handshake and said, "Glad you made it." "Ethan, Ryan's been talking about this trip for weeks." His voice was calm, deep, the kind that made you slow down just to listen. Inside, the house was simple but full of warmth, photos on every wall, the faint smell of coffee, and wood floors that creaked with every step. Ryan showed me to the guest room, told me dinner would be ready soon, then disappeared upstairs to unpack. From the window, I could see the lake catching the light of the setting sun. For a second, I felt like I'd stepped into someone else's peaceful life. That night we grilled outside. Mark handled the food while Ryan set up music on an old Bluetooth speaker. The three of us ate on the porch, laughing, swapping stories about college and work. Mark didn't say much at first, but when he did, his words carried a quiet kind of wisdom. He asked me about my job, my plans, my family. No one had asked me those questions in a while, and I realized how easy it was to talk to him. After dinner, Ryan went inside to call a friend, leaving just me and Mark under the fading sky. Fireflies floated around the yard, and the lake reflected streaks of orange and blue. Mark leaned back in his chair and said softly, "It's good to see Ryan laughing again. He's been a bit lost since the divorce." The honesty in his tone caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. We sat there quietly, listening to the sound of the water touching the shore. The next morning, Ryan woke early to meet some old friends in town. I offered to come along, but he waved me off. "Nah, just locals. I'll be back by lunch." And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the big, echoing house. I made coffee, stepped outside, and found Mark already sitting on the porch reading a newspaper. He looked up and smiled. "Black, right?" he said, holding out a second mug. I was surprised he remembered. We sat there sipping in silence, both watching the ripples move across the lake. Later, he asked if I'd help fix a broken light on the deck. I said sure. The afternoon passed quietly, just the two of us working side by side, the smell of sawdust and sunscreen filling the air. At one point, our hands brushed when we both reached for the screwdriver. It lasted only a second, but it sent a small, unexpected jolt through me. I pulled my hand back quickly, hoping he hadn't noticed. He didn't say anything, just smiled faintly and kept working. Still, my chest felt tight. That evening, Ryan came back late, full of stories about his friends. We played cards and laughed, but my mind kept drifting to the moment on the deck, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of his father's quiet breathing beside me, the feeling I couldn't name. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just tired. But when I lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The lake outside shimmered silver under the moonlight. From somewhere down the hall came the soft creak of footsteps, then silence again. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to sleep. Still, the thought lingered in the back of my mind, whispering questions I didn't want answers to. I'd come here for a peaceful vacation, but something about this place, about him, felt like the calm before a storm I couldn't see coming. The next few days passed in a blur of sunlight, quiet mornings, and long afternoons that felt almost too calm. Ryan was hardly ever home. He'd leave after breakfast, saying he was catching up with old friends or running errands in town, and come back after dark with a tired smile. At first I didn't think much of it. It gave me time to rest, to read, to think. But slowly, I realized that most of my days were spent not with Ryan, but with his dad. Mark and I fell into an easy rhythm. I'd help him with small things around the property, trimming branches, fixing loose steps, sweeping the dock. He'd make jokes about how he finally had free labor, and I'd laugh, secretly enjoying the excuse to stay close. There was nothing strange about it at first. It was just two people talking, learning each other's habits. But beneath the surface, something unspoken started to move. He told me stories from his younger years, about the time he hitchhiked through California, about his first car, about how he met Ryan's mother when they were barely older than I am now. His voice carried a mix of nostalgia and regret, like someone watching his past from a distance. I found myself hanging on every word. When he spoke, the world around us seemed to slow down. One afternoon, while painting the porch railing, Mark stopped mid-stroke and said quietly, "It's strange, isn't it? You spend your whole life building something, and one day it just changes." I wasn't sure if he was talking about the house or his marriage. I wanted to ask, but something told me not to. I just nodded. He smiled faintly and kept painting. That night, Ryan went to a bonfire party with friends, leaving me and Mark at the house again. A storm rolled in around sunset. The sky turned purple, then black, and soon the rain was hammering down hard enough to shake the windows. The power flickered once, then went out completely. Mark found a box of candles, and we lit them one by one until the house glowed softly in shades of amber. The storm outside sounded almost alive, rumbling across the lake. We sat at the kitchen table, the candlelight flickering between us. I remember the way the light hit his face, calm, thoughtful, a little sad. He asked if I liked my job, if I felt fulfilled. I said I wasn't sure anymore, that sometimes I felt like I was living someone else's life. He nodded, understanding instantly. "That feeling doesn't really go away," he said. "You just learn to live with it, or you change something." For a moment we sat in silence, listening to the rain. Then he said quietly, "You remind me of myself when I was younger, when everything felt uncertain but alive." The way he said it made my stomach twist. There wasn't anything in his tone that crossed a line, but something in me reacted anyway, like a door opened that I didn't know was there. The candle beside us flickered. Our hands were both resting on the table, close but not touching. I could feel the warmth between them, just a few inches of air separating two people who suddenly understood too much about each other. When he finally looked up, our eyes met. Neither of us said a word. The silence carried more meaning than speech ever could. A sudden clap of thunder broke the moment. He stood and smiled gently. "You should get some rest," he said. I nodded. My voice caught somewhere between guilt and confusion. That night I lay awake, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, replaying the scene in my head. There had been no words, no actions that could be called wrong. Yet something had shifted. I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd crossed into new territory, one lined with quiet danger. The next morning, Ryan was cheerful as always, unaware of the invisible storm still lingering between me and his father. We ate breakfast together, but I barely tasted the food. Mark was calm, almost too calm. He spoke to me the same way as before, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a kind of restraint. After breakfast, he asked if I wanted to go for a walk by the lake. I agreed. We didn't say much as we walked. The air smelled of wet pine and new rain. The sun had returned, making the lake shimmer like glass. At one point, he stopped and looked out across the water. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said. I nodded, though my mind was miles away. When we turned back toward the house, I noticed his hand brush lightly against mine. Not by accident, not completely intentional either. It was enough to make my heart race. I didn't pull away, but neither did I reach for him. We just walked in silence, both pretending it hadn't happened, both knowing it had. That evening, Ryan came home early and suggested we all have dinner together. He was animated, full of stories, laughing louder than usual. But all I could feel was the tension sitting quietly in the spaces between us, invisible, heavy and unspoken. I smiled, nodded, played along. Inside, though, I knew something had changed forever. The last few days of the trip felt different, even though no one said anything out loud. Ryan was around more often, but the easy laughter we used to share felt forced now, like we were acting out a version of friendship that didn't quite fit anymore. I couldn't look at him the same way, not with the weight of what I was feeling pressing against my chest. Every time I glanced toward Mark, he seemed composed, calm, like nothing had changed. But in quiet moments when no one else was watching, I'd catch his eyes lingering just a second too long. I tried to convince myself it was just in my head, that I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe the storm, the candlelight, the loneliness had made me read too much into it. But deep down I knew that wasn't true. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything we hadn't said. On Friday morning, Ryan suggested we all go into town for lunch. The small diner by the dock smelled like coffee and fried fish, and sunlight poured through the wide windows. Ryan was in a good mood, telling stories about high school and local gossip. Mark laughed politely, but I could feel how distant he was. At one point, Ryan got up to take a phone call outside, leaving just the two of us at the table. Mark looked out the window for a long time before finally saying, "He's a good kid. He always tries to take care of people even when he's not okay himself." His voice was low, almost sad. I nodded, unsure where this was going. Then he turned toward me. "Whatever this is between us," he said quietly, "it can't go anywhere." The words hit me like a cold wave, even though I'd expected them. "You haven't done anything wrong," he added, "but feelings can do damage, even if they stay unspoken." I wanted to say something, to explain, to apologize, to thank him for not pretending it didn't exist. But no words came. I just nodded. Ryan came back moments later, smiling, oblivious to the quiet storm that had just passed between us. That evening, I sat alone on the dock while the sun disappeared behind the trees. The water shimmered gold, then faded into gray. Mark came out after a while, standing a few steps behind me. Neither of us spoke. The silence was comfortable now, but heavy with finality. When I finally turned around, he just said, "You're leaving tomorrow, right?" I said yes. He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself, then turned back toward the house. That night was sleepless. Every creak of the old house, every shift in the wind seemed louder than usual. I thought about Ryan, about how much he trusted me. I thought about Mark, about the quiet strength in his voice, about how connection could be both beautiful and destructive at the same time. I wasn't sure if I felt more guilty or grateful. Maybe both. The next morning I packed my things before sunrise. Ryan was still asleep upstairs. Mark was already in the kitchen, making coffee. For a long moment I stood there, unsure if I should say anything. Finally I said, "Thank you for letting me stay." He looked up from his mug and smiled faintly. "You were good company," he said simply. Then he added, "Take care of yourself, Ethan. Don't let this confuse you. Let it teach you something." I wanted to ask what exactly I was supposed to learn, but he was already turning toward the window, watching the light rise over the lake. There was nothing more to say. As I loaded my bag into the car, the air felt cool and clean. The lake was perfectly still, reflecting the sky like glass. Mark stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, watching quietly. I gave a small wave. He nodded once, his expression unreadable. Then I drove away, the gravel crunching under the tires until the sound faded into the trees. The road wound along the water, sunlight spilling through the leaves. For a while, I thought about calling Ryan, telling him I'd made it home, maybe trying to explain. But I didn't. Some things were better left unspoken. Not because they didn't matter, but because they mattered too much. Back in the city, everything felt louder, faster, emptier. I returned to my routine, my job, my small apartment. But every so often, something would remind me of that week. The smell of rain, a song from that summer, the way the light looked on still water. And each time I'd feel the same quiet ache in my chest. I went there for a break, a simple vacation, but instead I found something else, a truth I wasn't looking for. That connection can't always be controlled, and that sometimes the people who teach us the most are the ones we can't keep. It wasn't love in the way stories like to tell it. It was something softer, stranger. Two lives crossing for a brief moment, leaving both changed. I still think about that lake sometimes, about how calm it looked on the surface, while everything beneath it moved quietly, powerfully, unseen. And when I remember that summer, I don't think about guilt anymore. I think about growth, the way a storm clears the sky, the way endings make room for something new.